3 weeks. That's all it took for my husband to completely lose control. I left for a simple work trip and came back to a home that smelled like gasoline, ranch dressing, and regret. 3 weeks ago, I left for a work trip. Nothing extraordinary, just a short conference in Chicago. I remember the morning I packed my suitcase, rushing between the bedroom and the kitchen, making sure the dog had enough food, the plants had been watered, and the house was in order. My husband leaned against the counter, still half asleep, holding a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. He smiled lazily and said, "Don't worry, I'll be fine. I'll hang back, game a little, order pizza." I laughed. He was 41, not 14. I thought, he's an adult? He'll be fine. That sentence still echoes in my head sometimes, in that same calm, trusting tone that only truly naive people have before their lives catch fire. Sometimes literally. The first 2 days of my trip were uneventful. The conference was exhausting but productive. I called him each evening. He sounded cheerful. On the second night, though, there was noise in the background, something like a smoke alarm. "Everything okay?" I asked. He laughed nervously. Yeah, I'm just experimenting in the kitchen." "Trying to become a grill master?" I frowned. "We don't have a grill." "Exactly," he said. I improvised. I decided I didn't want to know what that meant. But when I came home later, I would find out in great detail. Apparently, he had stacked 3 baking sheets on top of each other, poured lighter fluid over them, and set it ablaze inside the oven. He'd opened all the windows and fanned the smoke with a towel, but the alarm had gone off for 40 minutes straight. The oven door was scorched, the kitchen smelled like gasoline, and the neighbors had texted me asking if we were all right. He said it was an experiment. I said it was arson adjacent. The next day, between sessions, I got another call from him. "You ever hear about minimalist living?" he asked. "Sure," I said. "Why?" "Because it's the future. We don't need so much stuff cluttering our lives. I've been watching these videos and I think I'm ready to simplify." I didn't argue. I was too tired, too far away to stop whatever enlightenment was about to descend on our home. "Just don't throw away anything important," I said. He promised. He lied. By the time I returned, half of our kitchenware was gone. Not sold, not stored, gone. "We only need 1 bowl each," he said proudly. "It keeps life simple." The problem was that he'd chosen the wrong bowls, 1 oversized salad bowl and the dog's water dish. Every other plate, cup, and utensil had vanished into whatever black hole minimalist logic had created. I stood there, speechless, staring at the barren kitchen shelves, and for the first time in years, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The dog sat beside me, tail wagging hesitantly, as if sensing that this was not the time for optimism. Then came the burritos. He'd bulk ordered 20 frozen burritos from an online store. That was his entire diet for the next 2 weeks. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, burritos. At first, he microwaved them properly. By the end of the week, he started eating them half frozen to save electricity. He said it was efficient, a cold wrap with personality. I said it was culinary regression. When I called again a few days later, he was laughing. "Guess what?" he said. "I've gone off laundry." "What does that even mean?" I asked. "It means," he said, "I'm freeing myself from the cycle of cleanliness. I'm letting the fabric find its natural state." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. When I came home, he had rotated between the same 2 pairs of basketball shorts for 21 days. They had fused into what I could only describe as cardboard-textured denim. The dog growled every time he sat down, as if even the animal understood that the fabric had crossed into forbidden territory. The night I came home, the house didn't smell like home. It smelled like burnt plastic and ranch dressing. He was shirtless in the living room, playing a recorder he'd ordered online because, as he put it, Mozart slapped. He was trying to learn Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but it sounded like the soundtrack to a haunting. I stood there, luggage still in my hand, and realized I didn't know this man. Or maybe I did, and this was just what he looked like when left unsupervised. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of him mumbling in his sleep. He said, "I am the burrito." The dog had relocated to the bathtub by then and refused to come out. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and tried to piece together how 3 weeks could turn a functioning adult into a man whose spiritual totem was frozen Mexican cuisine. I told myself I wasn't angry. Not really, just bewildered. You marry someone thinking you know them, their routines, their limits, their capacity for chaos, and then life gives you a crash course in how wrong you can be. Sitting in that kitchen, sipping my coffee like it was holy water, I realized something simple yet terrifying. Maybe this wasn't an accident. Maybe this was who he'd been all along. A man waiting for the right amount of freedom to become unrecognizable. The dog barked from the bathroom. I sighed. The coffee tasted burnt, probably because the machine had absorbed the scent of gasoline from his grill experiment. I thought about leaving for another trip. Somewhere far, somewhere with functioning adults. Instead, I texted my friend, "Cafe urgent." 10 minutes later, I was out the door, the dog riding shotgun, both of us looking like survivors of an invisible war. At the cafe, the barista asked if I wanted almond milk. I just stared at her and said, "No, my house is already nut-based chaos." She laughed politely, not knowing it wasn't a joke. That morning, as I sat there with my coffee cooling between my hands and my dog trembling beside me, I started thinking that maybe every relationship has its breaking point. Not a big one, Not a betrayal or a fight, but something small and absurd that quietly unravels you. For me, it was frozen burritos, and a man who declared himself one with the snack. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Something had shifted between us. Something invisible but real, and when I went back home that evening, I found proof. When I walked back through the front door that evening, I half expected to find everything exactly as I'd left it that morning. Chaos preserved like a museum exhibit of poor decisions. But something had changed. The air felt still, too quiet, the kind of silence that only appears after someone's either cleaned up or given up. The smell of burnt plastic was gone, replaced by the faint scent of air freshener. Summer breeze, the kind I'd bought months ago but never opened. My husband was sitting on the couch wearing a clean shirt, which was already enough to make me pause. The recorder was gone. The burrito wrappers that had covered the coffee table were gone too. It was unsettling, the sudden neatness, like walking into a crime scene that had been wiped down. He looked up when he heard me. "Hey," he said simply. "Hey," I answered, waiting for the punchline that didn't come. He smiled faintly, like a child trying to hide a bad report card. "I cleaned up," I nodded. "I see that." The dog, still traumatized, peeked out from behind my legs and gave a cautious growl. We stood there for a few moments, the air heavy between us. Then I sat down across from him and said, "Talk." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You're mad." "I'm tired," I said. "Mad comes later." He sighed and leaned back. "I know I messed up. It's just when you left, the house felt empty, quiet in a way I didn't expect. I kept turning on the TV just to have noise. Then I started scrolling through videos, trying to fill the silence, and before I knew it, I was lighting pans on fire and eating frozen burritos." He laughed awkwardly. It sounds stupid when I say it out loud. I watched him carefully, trying to decide whether this was genuine self-awareness or just another layer of his absurdity. "You could have called," I said softly. "You could have told me you were lonely." He shrugged. "Didn't want to bother you. You sounded so busy, so focused. I didn't want to be the needy husband who couldn't handle 3 weeks alone." The honesty in his voice surprised me. There was no humor this time, no self-defense. Just a kind of small, quiet truth that made the whole situation hurt in a different way. I realized then that beneath all the nonsense, the grill experiment, the minimalism, the burrito diet, there was something else. An attempt to feel in control of something. Anything in my absence. He wasn't trying to ruin the house. He was trying to fill a void. We talked for a long time that night. About the silence. About how easy it is for two people to live together and still drift apart in small, invisible ways. He admitted he hadn't realized how much of our routine depended on me until I wasn't there to keep it going. I admitted that I'd gotten used to handling everything, that I'd made it too easy for him not to notice. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no grand declarations. Just quiet understanding, the kind that feels heavier than shouting. Later, while we cleaned what was left of the kitchen together, I found something odd in the trash, a small stack of index cards covered in his handwriting. Each card had a rule written on it, like rule number 1, never let the house be silent for too long, or rule number 4, eat at least one meal at the table, even if it's a burrito. They were his way of structuring the chaos, of trying to feel grounded while he unraveled. I kept one of the cards, the first one, the simplest one. It said, "Rule numero, don't let her think I can't manage without her." I didn't show it to him. I just slipped it into my pocket and continued scrubbing the counter. Some truths don't need to be spoken out loud to matter. By the time we finished cleaning, the house smelled like lemon soap instead of gasoline. The dog had even ventured out of the bathroom, sniffing suspiciously at the air before curling up beside the couch. My husband looked exhausted but lighter somehow, as if confessing had reset something in him. We didn't fix everything that night. Real marriages don't work that way. But we took the first small step. A shared silence that didn't feel heavy this time. A silence that simply was. Before bed, he asked quietly, "You're not going to tell your friends about this, are you?" I smiled. "I might," I said, "but I'll leave out the burrito part." He chuckled, relieved. As I turned off the lights, I caught a glimpse of him folding laundry for the first time in weeks. It wasn't perfect. He mixed the whites and colors, used too much detergent, but it was something. And for the first time since coming home, I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd be fine. In the days that followed our quiet truce, things began to feel almost normal again. The house no longer smelled like lighter fluid, and my husband no longer smelled like defeat. He started cooking actual meals, simple ones, mostly eggs or pasta, and he stopped referring to himself as the burrito. For a while, I let myself believe that everything was fine, that his strange spiral into chaos had just been the product of boredom and bad judgment, but a small voice inside me refused to rest. It wasn't just the mess or the absurdity of his choices. It was the way he had talked that first night, about silence, about control, about not wanting to be needy. That word stuck to me like a splinter. One night, about a week after my return, I woke up around 2 in the morning and found the bed empty. I called his name softly, but there was no answer. I got up and followed the faint glow of light coming from the living room. He was sitting on the couch, staring at the television, not watching anything, just staring at the black screen as if it were showing something only he could see. The dog was asleep at his feet, finally at peace. "You okay?" I whispered. He turned toward me, startled like someone caught in the middle of a confession. "Yeah," he said, but the word was too quick, too rehearsed. I sat down beside him. "You've been quiet lately," I said. "Not the usual quiet and the heavy kind." He smiled weakly. "I didn't mean to worry you." We sat there for a moment before he sighed and said, "You know, my dad used to do this. Just sit here like this, staring at nothing. My mom used to travel for work too. Every time she left, he'd try to distract himself, start weird projects, fix things that weren't broken, talk about simplifying life. I never understood it as a kid. But now," he paused, "I guess I inherited it. It hit me then, all of it. The obsession with routines, the empty noise, the ridiculous coping mechanisms. This wasn't about boredom or carelessness. This was about loneliness, about fear. When I was little," he continued, "he'd tell me that silence was dangerous, that if the house got too quiet, it meant she wasn't coming back. So he'd make noise. Any noise. He'd burn things, break things, just so it felt alive. I thought it was crazy. And then you left, and suddenly the quiet felt like that again. I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd thought of him as the calm one, the steady one, the rock that grounded me when my own life spun too fast. But now I saw that beneath all of it, there was this old, unhealed wound, the child who had waited too many nights for a mother who came home late, or sometimes not at all. I didn't know," I said quietly. He shrugged. "It's not something I ever talked about." It sounds stupid, doesn't it? A grown man terrified of silence. I reached for his hand. It doesn't sound stupid. It sounds human. He didn't look at me right away, but I felt his hand tighten around mine. For the first time since I'd returned, he didn't try to make a joke, didn't try to change the subject. He just sat there, letting the truth fill the space between us. The next morning, he was different, calmer, more grounded. He started making small changes, not out of guilt, but out of intention. He replaced the dishes he'd thrown out. He apologized to the neighbors for the smoke incident. He even started taking walks with the dog in the evenings, no phone, no distractions. Sometimes I'd join him, and we'd walk in silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. But there were still moments when I'd find him drifting, standing too long by the window, lost in thought. Once I caught him humming softly to himself while doing the laundry. It wasn't the chaotic hum of before, but something steady, like he was teaching himself to exist peacefully in the quiet. I learned something too. I realized how easy it is to mistake someone's stillness for stability, how often we assume that being fine means being whole. For years, I'd left him to his own rhythm, thinking that independence was the sign of a healthy relationship. But sometimes independence is just loneliness dressed up to look respectable. That night, before we went to bed, I asked him what he wanted for dinner the next day. "Anything but burritos," he said. I laughed genuinely this time. "Deal." He smiled and kissed the top of my head. "Thanks for not giving up on me." "I wasn't planning to," I said. The light from the hallway cast a soft glow across his face. For the first time in weeks, he looked like himself again. And as I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how fragile love really is, not in the grand, cinematic way people imagine, but in the small domestic moments, in the things we take for granted, in the silences we let grow too long. The next morning, I found him making pancakes in the kitchen. They were slightly burnt, unevenly shaped, and probably inedible. But the smell of batter and syrup filled the air, and for once the house didn't feel heavy. It felt alive again. I took a deep breath, smiled, and said, "You're getting better at this." He laughed. "Give me 3 weeks and I'll master it." I raised an eyebrow. "We've seen what happens when you try to master things." He grinned, flipping a pancake that somehow landed perfectly. "Maybe this time," he said, "I'll get it right." The days that followed were quieter. Not the heavy kind of quiet that used to hang over us like a fog, but a gentler one, soft and breathable. The kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the air still smells like rain but the sky has cleared. The house felt different now. It wasn't perfect. We were still navigating around the mess. The burned oven, the missing dishes, but it felt alive again. Like something fragile had survived and was learning to breathe. I started noticing small things about him that I hadn't paid attention to in years. The way he hummed when he cooked. The way he tapped his fingers against the table when he was thinking. The way he lingered a second longer when he hugged me in the mornings. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see him as the man who'd made a mess. I saw him as someone trying to rebuild himself one piece at a time. He began writing in that notebook every day. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of what he was jotting down. Simple things, thoughts, small promises to himself. Rule number 6, say thank you more often. Rule number 9, cook without panic. Rule the 11, don't let her leave without saying goodbye. I never commented, but I always smiled when I saw him writing. It was his way of stitching the world back together. One evening, about 2 weeks after our talk, he came into the living room holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to me and sat down beside me on the couch. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe we should take a trip together, just us. No work, no schedules." I looked at him surprised. "You hate traveling." "I don't hate traveling," he said, smiling. "I hate airports. There's a difference." I laughed. and for a second, it felt like we were back to how we used to be, before the long silences, before the burnt kitchen and the dog's emotional trauma. Where would we go? I asked. Somewhere quiet, he said, then caught himself and chuckled. But, you know, the good kind of quiet, I nodded. I'd like that. He leaned back, stretching his arm along the back of the couch, his fingertips brushing my shoulder. You know, he said after a pause, when you left, I didn't realize how much of myself I'd handed over to routine. It wasn't just about missing you. It was like I didn't know what to do with myself when no one needed me. That's a scary feeling. I listened carefully. He'd never spoken like this before. It was raw, unfiltered, like the version of him I'd always sensed beneath the humor but had never really met. It's not weakness, I said softly. Everyone wants to be needed, he nodded. Yeah, but I think I confused being needed with being loved. They're not the same, are they? That question hung in the air for a moment. I took a sip of tea, thinking. No, I said finally. They're not. But sometimes they overlap. The trick is not losing yourself in either. He looked at me with that quiet intensity again, the kind that made me realize he was really listening. I've been thinking about how we got here, he said. Not the burritos and the laundry part, the before that. How I started pulling away. I think I was afraid you'd outgrow me, that you'd go out there and realize you didn't need me anymore. I set my cup down and reached for his hand. You don't have to compete with me, I said. We're supposed to grow together. That's the point. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening in the lamplight. I know that now. The dog, sensing the shift in the room, climbed onto the couch and wedged himself between us. We both laughed, and the sound broke whatever weight had been gathering between us. It felt simple again. Comfortable, familiar, human. Over the next few days, the house began to fill with life again. He started cooking dinners that didn't end in disaster, though he refused to touch the oven. I worked fewer late nights. We started taking walks after dinner, not because we needed to talk, but because we enjoyed the quiet together. That was new for us, learning to share silence instead of fighting it. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of clattering in the kitchen. My first instinct was fear, a flashback to the day of the grill experiment. But when I came downstairs, what I saw made me stop. He'd set the table, plates, forks, even napkins, all mismatched because of his minimalist purge, but he'd tried. There were scrambled eggs, slightly overcooked bacon, and pancakes that looked like continents. The dog sat obediently by his feet, tail wagging. Breakfast, he said proudly. I smiled. It smells like redemption, he grinned. Better than gasoline? Significantly. As we ate, we talked about nothing in particular, old stories, small memories. At one point, he said something that made me pause. Do you think, he asked, that maybe this was supposed to happen? Not the fire part, obviously, but everything else. Maybe we needed it. I thought about that for a moment. Maybe, I said. Sometimes people fall apart just to see what they're made of. He nodded. Guess we're more durable than I thought. After breakfast, I found his notebook on the counter again. A new rule was written in his messy handwriting. Rule number 14. Don't wait for her to leave to miss her. I stood there for a long time staring at it, feeling something tighten in my chest. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the sky fade from orange to purple, he reached for my hand. You know, he said, I used to think love was about keeping things together, making sure nothing broke. But now I think it's about knowing that things will break sometimes and choosing to stay anyway. I smiled, my eyes stinging. That's the smartest thing you've ever said, he laughed. Give me a few years, maybe I'll top it. The dog barked at a passing car, breaking the moment, but I didn't mind. The world was still messy, still unpredictable, but it felt manageable again. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, I found him standing by the closet, staring at his reflection in the mirror. What are you thinking about? I asked. He smiled softly. That I almost lost us over something as stupid as silence. I walked over and wrapped my arms around him. You didn't lose us, I said. You just scared us a little. He laughed quietly, pressing his forehead against mine. Promise me something, he whispered. If I ever start acting weird again, just remind me to turn on the noise before I burn down the kitchen. I smiled. Deal. That night, I fell asleep with my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. No noise, no chaos, just peace. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream about burnt ovens or frozen burritos. I dreamed about us. Ordinary, flawed, still learning. The next morning, when sunlight poured into the room, I realized that healing doesn't happen in grand gestures or perfect apologies. It happens in quiet mornings, shared laughter, bad coffee, and small acts of choosing each other again and again. Maybe that's what love really is, not the absence of mistakes, but the willingness to rebuild what's left after them. Looking back now, I realize how fragile everything was, how one ordinary trip could expose every small fracture we had ignored for years. It's strange how easy it is to believe that love is strong simply because it's familiar. You live beside someone long enough, you start assuming they'll always stay the same, that the rhythm you share will never change tempo. But life always shifts. And when it does, it forces you to face the version of yourselves you've been avoiding. In the months since everything happened, we've found a new normal. The house no longer feels like a battlefield. The smell of smoke is gone, replaced by the faint scent of vanilla candles. The oven works again, though neither of us talks about the grill incident. The dog has finally reclaimed the couch, though sometimes he still eyes the kitchen like he's expecting another explosion. We never spoke about the meltdown in grand terms. There was no dramatic apology tour, no promise of perfection, just small, consistent changes. He started cooking dinner twice a week, nothing fancy. Soups, pasta, sometimes breakfast for dinner. He stopped pretending to be the man who had everything under control. And I stopped pretending that I didn't sometimes make things worse by trying to manage everything alone. There's a kind of peace in honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. One night, months later, we were sitting on the porch again, watching the summer lightning crawl across the clouds. It had rained earlier and the air smelled clean. The dog snored at our feet. I looked over at him and said, "Do you ever think about that week?" He laughed quietly. "Every time I see a burrito," I smiled. "Do you regret it?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. I think I needed to fall apart a little to figure out what was missing. It wasn't about the house or the food or even you being gone. It was about me. I'd stopped looking after myself somewhere along the way. I was just existing." I nodded. "We both were." He turned to me, his expression soft. "I used to think love meant not needing anyone. Like the stronger you are, the less you depend. But it's kind of the opposite, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "It's not about dependence. It's about trust. About being able to say, 'I'm not okay,' and knowing the other person won't see you as weak." He reached over and squeezed my hand. "Then I'm glad I finally learned that. Even if it took turning our kitchen into a crime scene." I laughed, the sound echoing softly through the night. Later that week, I found his notebook again. It had more pages now, some filled with messy sketches, others with new rules. One stood out. Rule number 23. Don't wait for peace to start living. I tore that one out and pinned it to the fridge. He didn't say anything about it, but that night he made us dinner. Nothing extravagant, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. We ate in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that no longer scared him. Afterward, we cleaned the kitchen together. He wiped the counters and I washed the dishes, our one remaining salad bowl and the mismatched set we'd slowly rebuilt over time. It wasn't the kitchen we'd had before, but it was ours, shaped by laughter, mistakes, and all the burnt edges we'd learned to smooth out. At one point, I looked over and said, "You know, I never told you this, but when I came back from that trip, I sat in a cafe before coming home. I didn't want to walk in. I was so tired, and I thought maybe something in us had already gone too far to fix." He froze, the sponge in his hand dripping water onto the counter. "You thought about leaving?" "Not leaving," I said softly. "Just stopping. Not trying anymore. I felt like we were both ghosts in the same house. But then I came home and saw you sitting there shirtless, playing a recorder, surrounded by burritos, and for some reason I realized I couldn't walk away from that. It was too ridiculous not to fight for." He started laughing so hard he had to lean against the sink. When he caught his breath, he said, "So the burritos saved our marriage?" "Maybe they did," I said. In a weird way, that laughter filled the room like light. And I realized then that the real beauty of love isn't in how perfect you can keep it, but in how honestly you can rebuild it after you've set it on fire, sometimes literally. Now, when I travel for work, he doesn't panic. He calls, sends me pictures of the dog, updates me on his meals, and every time before I hang up, he says, "The house is fine. You can come home to quiet." And I believe him. The truth is we both grew up in that chaos. He learned to be still with himself. I learned to let go of control. And together, we learned that love isn't about surviving the easy parts. It's about surviving the absurd ones. The messy, smoky, burnt, frozen burrito parts. When people ask me now what the secret is, I don't have a poetic answer. It's not communication or patience or compromise, though those matter. It's humor. It's the ability to look at the ashes and still laugh. It's the understanding that sometimes the person you love will set fire to the kitchen, and sometimes you'll be the one holding the lighter without realizing it. We're both still learning. The house still has burn marks. The oven still smells faintly of gasoline when it gets too hot. The dog still hides during thunderstorms. But every morning when I see him standing at the counter making breakfast, humming off key, I feel that quiet, steady peace again. Because this time, the silence doesn't mean absence. It means home.